Imagine waking up in the middle of the night and realizing that all of Egypt is different. The silence no longer exists. Through the streets, through the houses, through the palaces, something is happening. People are frightened. Families are gathered together. No one knows exactly what will happen next, but everyone knows one thing. This is not an ordinary night. Outside, one of the greatest empires in the world is facing something it has never encountered before. Egypt, a land known for its great monuments, for its wealth, for its powerful rulers. But on that night, not even all the power of Pharaoh seemed to be enough. And while many in Egypt were overcome with fear, in a simple Hebrew house, there was a different kind of waiting. They had also seen everything happen. They had also felt the weight of those days. But there was something that set them apart from the others. A promise, an instruction, a sign of protection. But how did that night reach that point? To understand, we need to go back to the beginning. For many years, the Hebrews lived as slaves in Egypt. They worked under severe oppression. They built, they carried, they suffered, and they cried out for deliverance. According to the book of Exodus, God heard that cry, and he raised up Moses to deliver a message to Pharaoh. Let my people go. But Pharaoh refused, even after the warnings, even after the signs. The ruler's heart remained hardened. And then the events that would forever change the history of Egypt began. At first, it seemed like something strange. The Nile River, the source of life for Egypt, changed. The water that sustained that land was no longer the same as before. What seemed impossible began to happen. The river, which represented strength and security for the Egyptians, showed that something greater was happening. But that was only the beginning. Then came the frogs. They appeared in great numbers. They were everywhere. In the houses, on the roads, in the places where people lived. What had once seemed like only a distant problem now became part of everyday life. Then came something even closer. The very dust of the earth became a sign. Small insects struck both people and animals. It was no longer something that could be ignored. The problem was all around. It was present. After that, the environment of Egypt began to change completely. Swarms appeared. Daily life became difficult. What had once seemed like an organized and powerful land began to lose control. Then came one of the most difficult changes. The animals were struck. And this brought deep consequences. Because in the ancient world, animals were not just possessions. They represented food, work, survival. Now the crisis was directly affecting the lives of families, but the signs continued. Then came sores, something that was not only in the environment, but on the body itself. People realized that this was not a series of ordinary events. A message was being delivered. Then the sky changed. A powerful storm struck Egypt. Hail fell upon the land. Fields were affected. Crops were struck. What had seemed impossible was now before everyone's eyes. But even so, Pharaoh remained unchanged in his decision. Then came the locusts, and they consumed what was left. What the storm had not destroyed was reached by them. Egypt, which had seemed so strong, was beginning to realize its fragility. And then came something no one expected: the darkness. For 3 days, a great darkness covered Egypt. It was not merely the absence of sunlight, it was a moment when everything seemed to stand still, as if the whole land were waiting for the next event. And then, we arrive at that night. The night that would mark the end of that period. But before it happened, an instruction was given. God did not bring that moment without warning. Throughout the entire journey, there were signs, there were opportunities, there were calls for change. For the Hebrews, a specific instruction was given. Each family was to follow what God had commanded. The lamb, the sign on the doorposts. Trust in that promise. And now, go back to that night. The night we imagined at the beginning. You are inside that house. The light is dim. The family is gathered together. Outside, Egypt waits. There is fear. There is tension. But there is also trust. As the night passes, something happens throughout the land. A great cry is heard in Egypt, a night that no one would ever forget. But in that house, there was protection. Not because that family was stronger, not because they possessed greater wealth, but because they had obeyed the instruction they had received. After that night, Pharaoh finally allowed the Hebrews to leave. After so many years of living as slaves, the moment had arrived that many of them had probably never imagined they would see. The people began preparing their belongings. There was no time to wait, no turning back. The order was to leave. Imagine that moment. People who had spent years carrying burdens for Egypt were now carrying their own belongings. People who had been born in a land where their parents were slaves were now walking toward a new story. The Bible says that the Israelites departed from Ramesses toward freedom. It was a great multitude, entire families. Something changed within those people. The people who had once been enslaved were now free. And the Bible records that Moses and the Israelites sang to the Lord, celebrating the victory and the deliverance. Exodus 15. Because that night in Egypt was not merely the end of a series of events, it was the beginning of a new journey. But this story is not only about 10 plagues, it is about choices. It is about a God who first warns before he acts, a God who demonstrates justice, but also offers protection. Because before the judgment came the warnings, before the consequence came the opportunities. Perhaps the greatest question in this story is not, how did Egypt reach that night? But rather, how many times does God call people to change before it is too late? The story of Exodus continues to remind us that, even in difficult times, God does not abandon those who trust in him. And that night in Egypt was not merely a night of fear. It was the night when a people discovered that their deliverance was just beginning. If this story brought you something to reflect on, share this video. And may God continue to protect your life and your family.